Comrade says lit, right? lit, lit, lit. Real, live, lit, lit, lit. Right? The revolution is lit, lit, lit.
Uhuru, comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday Study live with the leader of the African nation, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. For today's show, we'll be remembering May 19th, the birthdays of historic revolutionaries Malcolm X and Ho Chi Minh. We're raising up these courageous leaders for their lasting impact on the world's anti-colonialist liberation struggles today. Chairman Omali will be joined by the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement's Vice President, Matsemela Odom, who will provide the overview, taking us into our discussion. Before we jump into it, I ask that you take this moment right now to like and share this video and tag someone to participate in today's discussion. Let's broaden the reach of this conversation. Comment shared in the chat section for us. I would like to turn it over now to Comrade Matsemela Odom for our overview. Uhuru, Vice President Matsemela.
Uhuru, how you doing? I'm really honored to be here. I'm Matsemela Odom, the International Vice President of the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. Like I said, I'm honored to be here and to join in on our discussion. Remember, May 19th, upholding Malcolm X and Ho Chi Minh. So let's go on and change slides. I would like to begin by saluting Chairman Omali Yeshitela, leader of the African Revolution. This image here is an important starting point for our discussion today. The 2019 photograph depicts Chairman Omali Yeshitela in his visit to Oxford, England, pointing at Malcolm X's photo during Malcolm's visit to the Oxford Union Debate Society 55 years earlier in 1964. Malcolm's presentation at the Oxford Union underscores an earlier period of African anti-colonial struggle that Chairman Omali Yeshitela has dubbed the African Revolution of the 1960s. Chairman's 2019 presentation represents a similar attempt of the colonial superstructure to make sense of the current moment of anti-colonial struggle. Chairman Omali has noted that the 1960s was in fact a dress rehearsal, and what we are now experiencing is the real deal, the final offensive. As noted elsewhere, Chairman Omali's invitation to the Africa debate highlights that there can be no discussion around the unity and or future of Africa and African people without the African internationalist worldview being considered a legitimate worldview. Change slides. Now, Malcolm X's leadership represented a resurgence of the anti-colonial tendency of the African liberation movement, a revival of the anti-colonial project of Marcus Garvey. In the 1910s and 1920s, Marcus Garvey created and led the largest revolutionary organization of African workers in history. The Universal Negro Improvement Association had over 11 million members in Africa, Europe, the Caribbean, Latin America, the United States, and elsewhere. Garvey forwarded the slogan, Africa for the Africans, those at home and abroad. I also think that it's important to note that Marcus Garvey's UNIA, when it held its convention of African peoples around the world, it was also an anti-colonial moment that showed solidarity with other anti-colonial struggles taking place around the world, including the one taking place in Ireland. So the Garvey movement was an anti-colonial and revolutionary movement. While the Garvey movement struggled to overturn the colonial mode of production and launched a direct attack against ideological imperialists and the liberal left who struggled for a better position on the pedestal of African oppression, Garvey and the UNIA also expressed unity with the liberation of workers in Ireland, Russia, and Asia. Garvey's movement was defeated through US counterinsurgency, yet as evidence in this talk today, we see his legacy in the work of Ho Chi Minh and Malcolm X. Change slides. We can also see this legacy in the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party, the African Socialist International, and the Uhuru movement. The African fundamentalism of Garvey is reflected in the African internationalism of Chairman Omali Yeshitela. We are the 21st century Garveyites. Change slide. Marcus Garvey is the chain that directly links Malcolm X and Ho Chi Minh, despite being 35 years apart in age. Ho Chi Minh was born May 19, 1890 in Vietnam, then called French Indochina by colonizers. Malcolm was born May 19, 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska. Both men spent formidable parts of their youth as laborers in Boston, Massachusetts, and in fact worked at the same place, the Parker House Hotel. Ho Chi Minh spent time in New York City as a worker. It was there that he attended public rallies held by Marcus Garvey and the UNIA. Malcolm, of course, also moved to New York City. His parents, Earl and Louise, initially met as UNIA organizers in Canada. His father was born in the US South and his mother was born in the West Indies. Change slides. Now, Ho Chi Minh was attracted to the anti-colonial project of Marcus Garvey. Garvey was an important source of Ho Chi Minh's anti-colonial and internationalist worldview. Ho Chi Minh was in fact born Nguyen Sinh Cung, but in 1917 he adopted the nom de guerre Nguyen Ai Quoc, or Nguyen the Patriot. Ho Chi Minh clearly outlined the shared colonial oppression of African and Asian people. Ho Chi Minh was a writer and a political cartoonist. Ho Chi Minh used his art to depict the colonial depression of African and Asian people. Ho Chi Minh would write, to the colonizer, the life of an African or an Asian is nothing. Change slides. Ho Chi Minh famously raised the question to French communists. Well, Ho Chi Minh famously raised the question to French communists in Paris, where he was the founder of the Paris Communist Party. If you do not condemn colonialism, If you're not side with the colonial people, what kind of revolution are you waging? Change slides. Ho Chi Minh understood the colonial contradiction and the question of national liberation beyond the borders that the colonial mode of production placed on African, Asian, and other colonized people. The advancements these advancements had been the advancements that had been made to push forward the colonial question as a part of the Comintern, the International Communist Party at that time, in the 1920s had been the result of people like Ho Chi Minh, as well as the Indian Amin Roy and others. As a seaman, Ho Chi Minh had traveled the colonial world. He had lived in Senegal and even the US South. Ho Chi Minh's writings placed the genocidal assault waged against African people in the Congo alongside the lynchings in North America. Ho Chi Minh opened his 1924 article on lynchings by stating, as seen on this slide here, "It is well known that the Black race is the most oppressed and the most exploited of the human family. It is well known that the spread of capitalism and the discovery of the New World had as an immediate result the rebirth of slavery. What everyone does not perhaps know is that after 65 years of so-called emancipation, Black people in the US still endure atrocious moral and material sufferings." Change slides. In celebration of the anti-colonial victory of Vietnam against the United States, we reprinted this article in the May 1975 edition of the Burning Spear newspaper. Change slides. Ho Chi Minh could clearly see African and Asian anti-colonial victory in sight. I believe that this is the significance of his chronicling of the success of Louis Mubarak Fall, also known as the Battling Siki. In 1922, Siki, born in Senegal, had defeated the Frenchman Georges Carpentier for the World Light Heavyweight Championship. In response, Ho Chi Minh wrote in the newspaper, "Ever since colonialism has existed, whites have been paid to bash in the faces of the Blacks. For once, a Black has been paid to do the same to a white." Change slides. Just like many Africans of my generation, Malcolm X came of age in the wake of US counterinsurgency to defeat African anti-colonial movement. This counterinsurgency claimed the life of his father, Earl, who was murdered by white nationalists. It also claimed the sanity of his mother, Louise. Africans had been driven out of political life, but the anti-colonial consciousness persisted inside young Malcolm. When called in front of the draft board during World War II, Malcolm told the Army clerk that he had wanted to join the Army so that he could go down south, get weapons, and organize Africans against white nationalists. Of course, they denied his entry. In opposition to the Korean War in 1950, he wrote a letter directly to President Truman, the US President Harry Truman at that time, and stated, "I have always been a communist. I've tried to enlist in the Japanese Army last war. Now they will never draft or accept me in the US Army." Change slides. Just as Ho Chi Minh had learned from the African anti-colonial struggle, Africans learned from Asian anti-colonialism. In the 1963 message to the grassroots, Malcolm X noted the inspiration he had taken from the Chinese Revolution while he was incarcerated. Raising the colonial question, Malcolm noted that in the Chinese struggle against the British imperialism and Chinese neocolonialism, the Chinese Revolution, he stated, they wanted land. They threw the British out along with the Uncle Tom Chinese. In the 1964 Battle of the Bullet speech, Malcolm saluted the anti-colonial victories in Korea and Vietnam. Up in French Indochina, those little peasants, rice growers, took on the might of the French army and ran all the Frenchmen. You remember Dien Bien Phu. The same thing happened in Algeria and Africa. So change slides. Now, following the Second Imperialist World War, the colonial powers struggled over the redivision of the world, as they had done following the First Imperialist World War. This is the impetus behind the creation of United Nations and NATO. Colonized people organized in their own self-interest as well. This underscores the importance of the Bandung Conference, of 1955, of which Malcolm also drew inspiration. At Bandung, Malcolm says, they began to recognize who their enemy was. The same man that was colonizing our people in Kenya was colonizing our people in the Congo. The same one in the Congo was colonizing our people in South Africa and in Southern Rhodesia and in Burma and in India and in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. Change slides. The point that Malcolm was making by citing Bandung and Dien Bien Phu was that Africans in the US were not part of some American minority. We were part of a global majority. Our struggle for liberation was for anti-colonial independence, not a battle to make white people like us. This is the importance of the dialectic of the house slave versus the field slave, of which Malcolm had called upon in that speech. Malcolm made at least 4 trips to the continent of Africa. His first was actually in 1959. In 1960, Malcolm met with Che, Castro, and Nkrumah, and others in Harlem. He studied Lumumba. He defended Lumumba. Lumumba is the greatest Black man who ever walked the continent of Africa, Malcolm said. As Secretary General of the African Socialist International, Louise Kinshasa notes, Malcolm, like Lumumba, wanted to make the Congo the center of the International African Revolution. Many sources state that Malcolm indeed had wanted to, in fact, raise an army of Africans from the US to go into Congo and fight against colonial and neo-colonial forces there. In his speeches, Malcolm raised the revolutionary anti-colonial example of the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, the Mau Mau. In Kenya, the Mau Mau were revolutionary. They were the ones who brought the word Uhuru to the fore. The Mau Mau, they were revolutionary. They believed in scorched earth. They knocked everything aside that got in their way. And their revolution was based on land, a desire for land. In late 1964, Malcolm returned to the Mau Mau as an example for African organization in the US. In Mississippi, we need a Mau Mau. In Alabama, we need a Mau Mau. In Georgia, we need a Mau Mau. Right here in Harlem, in New York City, we need a Mau Mau. I say this with no anger. I say it with very careful forethought. Just weeks after making this speech, Malcolm was murdered by the US counterinsurgency war. Change slide. Anti-colonial revolutionary and Asian member of Malcolm's Organization of Afro-American Unity, Yuri Kochiyama, also shares the same birthday as Malcolm and Ho Chi Minh. Yuri was a friend of the party, the African People's Socialist Party, and Chairman Omali Yeshitela. She held Malcolm's head after he was shot. Change slides. Just days before he was assassinated, just days after Malcolm was assassinated, Malcolm was supposed to share the stage with Che Guevara at an Afro-Asian economic summit organized by Ahmed Ben Bella in Algeria. However, a conference known as the Second Bandung was supposed to also take place in Algeria in late 1965. It did not occur because Ben Bella was overthrown by a military coup months earlier. This task of anti-colonial unity was taken up by Cuba in January 1966 in the Tricontinental Conference attended by 500 delegates from over 80 countries in accordance with Cuba's 7th independence. One of those delegates, Amilcar Cabral of Guinea-Bissau, called on delegates to return home and repeat this anti-colonial victory that had taken place in Cuba in their countries. As the African Revolution of the 1960s accelerated in the US, so did US counterinsurgency. Assassinations, imprisonment, and other activities aimed to derail the anti-colonial revolution accelerated. Change slides. Chairman Omali Yeshitela defended the colonial question, even as others abandoned it. Chairman's 1975 pamphlet, The Major Colonialism, the Major Problem Confronting Africans in the US, became regular political education for the African liberation movement, and it rescued African self-determination. A direct line can be drawn from the colonialism pamphlet to the revival of the anti-colonial analysis that we see in many places right now. Change slides. By defining the US government's attack on our government as counterinsurgency, a war against colonized people to prevent revolution, it gave us the mass character that we needed to bring us to this moment that we are at right now. Change slides. Now, May 19th. May 19th symbolizes anti-colonial revolution. This is why we remember it. It is an anti-colonial revolution that began with Marcus Garvey, was continued with Ho Chi Minh and Malcolm X, and will be completed under the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela. And in a 2019 speech entitled, "We Must Have an International African Revolution," Chairman Omali Yeshitela noted that after Vietnam had defeated the French in Dien Bien Phu, the US launched its attack to push the Vietnamese back into colonial slavery. However, the Vietnamese used the liberated territory they had in the north of Vietnam to wage anti-colonial struggle in the south of Vietnam. To do this, they used what was called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. To that point, the chairman says that chairman says, what we need a Malcolm X trail. We need a Marcus Garvey trail. We need a Patrice Lumumba trail that stretches across the globe so they cannot crush us in any single place, because all the African people who are conscious and part of a revolutionary process can come to the defense of the African revolution. So let's build that trail, Uhuru.
Uhuru, Comrade Vice President Matsemela Odom, Vice President of the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. I really want to appreciate this just insightful overview, reminding us of, these comrades' profound legacies. And I appreciate how we're able to raise up these comrades, not simply for some nostalgic practice, but because our party and its leader, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, represent the continued struggle, never abandoned. And with that being said, I would like to introduce our chairman, the leader of the African nation and the worldwide African revolution, who's going to deepen our understanding of these two very important figures, especially as it relates to our party's own relentless 50-year history. So Uhuru, chairman, welcome to the program. There we go.
Uhuru, thank you so much, Comrade Director Acoli. And I want to express my appreciation to the introduction that's been provided to us along with the PowerPoint, the slideshow by Comrade Matsemela. And I want to reiterate a point that you've just made, that this discussion around May 19 is not just a matter of indulging in empty, abstract kind of memorializing. It gives us an opportunity to speak about Malcolm X, to speak about Ho Chi Minh, to speak also about Comrade Yuri Kochiyama, and to have this discussion in the context of what is happening in the world today and our condition as colonized people, as oppressed people, as colonized peoples all around the world. And in fact, to give us an opportunity to explore more this understanding that we have been pushing forward in a very serious way, taking us beyond simply understanding colonialism as the policy of a particular kind of an imperialist power, but as a mode of production that has been thrust into existence for a long time, but has not been recognized by most people, most theoreticians, any of them. But that is fundamental to really understanding the world and how we have to move forward. We're looking at a situation right now, and it's really interesting when just looking, reviewing the PowerPoint that Comrade Matsemela just took us for. through, and seeing oppressed and colonized peoples around the world engage in struggle on different fronts at particular times against the colonial mode of production, against the conditions that oppress and steal our resources around globally. And reviewing the fact that there has been movement toward trying to pull together all of the colonized peoples at different times and our allies. For example, the photo that was shown just a moment ago had Joseph Tito from Yugoslavia, who was also part of this non-aligned movement that Nkrumah and others played a really important role. Nasser from Egypt was there as well, played a really important role of trying to bring the colonized peoples of the world together organizationally, politically, and what have you, to deal with colonialism that feeds all of the white people, all of the colonizers of the world. And the fact is that for a very long time, since the inception of what is known as capitalism, the white world has fed off the flesh of colonized people everywhere, that our oppression, our colonization, the theft of our resources, our labor, is a condition for what is in their refrigerators, for the streets that they have paved in their cities. It is part of the basis of the freedom that they seem to experience in various places around the world. Even the definition of democracy that they share comes as a consequence of taking all those things from us: clean water, clean streets, food, and freedom for our people. So this is a really important discussion that we have to have, because we can't understand anything unless we understand the colonial mode of production, one. The other thing that's really clear is that this movement of the colonized people was actually moving forward in a very serious way to overturn the relationship we have with colonialism. And that it has been an assault on and death and destruction of individuals, overturning governments in different places around the world that contributed to the rise of a kind of opportunism that's called desegregation as a diversion away from overturning colonialism to desegregate, to find some kind of independence that will allow us to live under neo-colonial domination. And this, of course, sacrifices the long-term interests of oppressed and colonized people around the world for our freedom, and speaks to the interests of neo-colonial colonizers, and speaks to the interests of opportunist sector of the population. In fact, the opportunism is defined by the fact that they will accept some solution short of overturning the relationship we have with colonialism. And just recently, I was engaged in a serious discussion, because part of what we have to understand is that we are in this place in history. We didn't drop from someplace out of space. We didn't simply pop up, and the world was not born like this. The fact is that there's a history to a process that led to this situation that we're involved in today. And one of the most important things that speaks to the situation we're involved in today is this question of Ukraine and Russia. And that has caused some confusion for some people. And we can understand how masses of people might be confused around this question, because there's no medium that is being put forward today that does not hail the so-called heroic Zelensky, who is the thug that was put in power in Ukraine by the United States government, CIA, and the Ukrainians, and the as compared to this force, the Russian despots, and Putin, the Russian despot. And without even talking about the validity or the viability of Vladimir Putin, or even the current state of Russia, it is absolutely necessary for us to understand that the reason we are in this place today around Russia in particular is because all of the imperial powers more than 100 years ago came together trying to crush the anti-colonial revolutions that was happening all around the world, including in the United States. You're talking about a world war that happened that they call World War I, which is the first worldwide war to redivide the world. This war is something that happened as a process of the colonizers to redivide the world among themselves. That's what it was for. Who was going to get what parts of Africa? Who was going to control what parts of Asia? And the likes, and for the United States, of course, consolidating domination throughout the Americas. So this is what that war was about. And you have to understand this, otherwise you can become intoxicated and confused about this notion of the war to end all wars, and somehow that this was a war to bring peace to the earth, when the only disruptor of the peace were the colonizers themselves who were engaged in the war. And this war was to redivide the world so that this sector of colonizers, this group of thugs that call themselves French, this group of thugs that call themselves Americans, this group of thugs that call themselves British, would get what portion of the world that would satisfy their imperialist appetites compared to the ones that they were struggling against. And the basis of this war was who was going to get what of us. And unfortunately, we live in a world where the colonial mode of production itself provides the periscope through which everybody views the world. And the only central place in the world, the one that came to be a central location in the world, came about as a consequence of the unification of the whole world through an economic process that stems from colonial slavery, starting with the attack on Africa some 600 years ago, and branching out and developing various iterations of this entire process throughout the world. This is what brought the world together into a single process, a single colonial mode of production. We talk about a mode of production. We're talking about a process that where a society is defined by how it acquires, how it achieves what it needs to exist. And a mode of production also produces a mode of life. And so you have this mode of production, mode of life, that has been created by the colonizer, by the slave owners, by the slave masters. That is the force that has mapped out the entire world geographically, mapped it out politically, mapped it out ideologically, mapped it out. And the world is supposed to view the world from the lenses of the colonizers. And the colonizer is the only one that has a total world view most of the time. Most of us are locked into these definitions that have been imposed on us by the colonizers. So we don't see the whole world in many instances. We see what they might be called Afro-Brazil. We see what might be called Haiti or Jamaica. We see what might be called Ghana now, a new iteration, or what might be called Congo. We see what might be called a new African, or something to that effect. Our view has been narrowed. Our worldview has been sharpened, been created, been manipulated by the colonizer. And the fact of the matter is that you have a society, you're talking about a mode of production, how the whole society participates in creating and recreating life and producing what is necessary for that society to function. In the process of doing that, it creates a mode of life. And this mode of life has locked all the colonizer and the colonized into a single process. You can't have one without the other. You can't have colonized people without there being a colonizer. You cannot have a colonizer without there being somebody colonized. So you have this unity of opposites within which the whole world functions, et cetera, and our worldview is defined. And so this is one of the reasons it's really important for us to be able to talk about Malcolm X and to talk about Ho Chi Minh, and also to recognize in the process of doing so that it took the death of Malcolm, it took the struggle of the people in Vietnam against the same colonialism that Malcolm talked about. It took this war to resurrect this whole notion, to create the whole notion that our struggle was not about freedom. Our struggle was not about the reacquisition of our own land, our own territory, our own dignity, et cetera. Our struggle was somehow to make ourselves amenable to white power, to the colonizer. to, to unite with the colonizers' definition of the world, even if it's a liberal definition, to unite with the colonizers' definition of the world. And the colonizers' definition of the world presupposes that colonialism is good. And even if it doesn't call itself colonialism anymore, because colonialism is a foreign and alien domination of peoples. And that's what Europe has done. And so the colonizers' worldview, whether it's the liberal colonizer, left colonizer, is that colonialism is good. And then what has to happen at best, from their perspective, is that the colonized people have to learn how to be like the colonized, or the colonized people have to work within this framework of making a better situation. And it doesn't require the overturning of the colonial mode of production, which is the only way that the people of Africa, African people, the people of Vietnam, and the rest of the world will ever know freedom. Colonialism, the colonial mode of production, has to be overturned, and you cannot have any real freedom. You can't have the destruction of capitalism, as they talk about it, without destroying colonialism, which the colonial mode of production, which is the foundation upon which all capitalist activity occurs. So it's important to recognize that. So we're talking about these giants who led struggles, not to make white people like us, to make America like us, or something to that effect. But as Malcolm X said for land, said that you're serious about revolution, that people have fought revolution, they wanted land, and who challenged the whole notions, the opportunist notion. By some people who we've come to like and love, they were opportunists even if we liked and loved them. They were opportunists even if they were honest opportunists, which is one of the things that makes them more dangerous, because they are motivated by conviction. But the fact is that this opportunism, because it stops short, it provides us with the worldview that comes short, that sacrifices the long-term interests of our people. And what is the long-term interest? Is the total abolition, the total destruction of this foreign alien entity that sits atop our freedom, our hopes, our aspirations, our dreams, our ability to be free and to be prosperous on our own terms, using our own resources. That's what has to happen. If you don't have that, you got nothing. And I don't care if you have people who call themselves leftists or something to that effect. That's the thing that we have to be struggling for. And even when we look at this issue of the Russia-Ukrainian question, it's important that we understand this question within the context of the process that brought the world to this place. Not what brought Pittsburgh to this place, not what brought Houston, Texas to this place, not simply what brought Ukraine or Russia to this place, but the whole process that brought the world to this place. And the thing is that the 1920s, during the height of this struggle, this crisis of imperialism that resulted in the first imperialist world war, anti-colonial struggles were happening everywhere. And if they were not happening, they were on the cusp of occurring. There was a threat for them happening, to the extent that it made it necessary for the US and other imperial powers to engage in serious war to secure the colonial mode of production. So Malcolm and Ho Chi Minh and Yuri Kochiyama have to be understood within this context of engaging anti-colonial struggle, forwarding anti-colonial struggle on the one hand. On the other hand, when we look at what's happening here today, the first imperialist world war in 1914, this war happens. 1914, the Universal Negro Improvement Association is created under the leadership of Marcus Garvey in Jamaica, and it moves to the United States. In 1917, incredible movement is begun with the Garvey movement. 1917, the success of the Russian Revolution. 1915, the United States government invades Haiti and occupies it for 30 years or so, robs Haiti of all the resources it's got. We've got struggles that's happening throughout the Americas, throughout Nicaragua and other places. We got struggles that's happening globally and inside the United States. Incipient struggles or actual struggles are occurring that leads to Red Summer 1919, where white people went on a frenzy of murder and assassinating and killing Black people inside the United States. And there are various other iterations of the same kind of struggle. And of course, the magnificent Garvey movement succeeded by 1920-21 of organizing millions of African people globally on every continent of the world. The Russian Revolution was something that stood out because it was in Russia. It was stood out because it was close to Europe. Eurasia is what might be a better definition of it. A huge landmass that occupies parts of Russia, parts of Europe, parts of Asia as it's defined. The whole notion of a European continent is specious anyway. So this is what happens. In the Russian Revolution, the Garvey movement was crushed, was defeated inside the United States. Many of us were defeated around other places in the world, Nicaragua, other places around the world, but the Russian Revolution succeeded. And you must understand the Russian Revolution within that context. It was a part of the anti-colonial movement. It was the struggle against colonialism that defined the world. It wasn't the so-called European-based workers' revolution. It was the struggle globally against colonialism that defined the world, and the Russian Revolution happened within that context. And I think that's absolutely necessary for us to understand. So we saw an invasion, all of the colonial powers in the whole world, including Japan, which was a colonial power in parts of Asia at that moment. All of them invaded Russia in 1918. And they worked since that time, since that invasion. The objective was to crush Russia because it played a role in upholding working people. And of course, the critical mass of working people in the whole world were in the colonies. That's where the real production was happening. Like many of the Marxists like to talk about how the real struggle, the political and economic struggle revolves at what they call the point of production. But the fact is, before things got to that point of production, they had to come from Africa. They had to come from Asia. They had to come from South America. This is where the resources came from that got to what they call the point of production. This is where the massive amount of labor was happening globally. And here you have this colonial mode of production that gives rise to capitalism. And this is the thing that startled and shook up the whole imperialist world, that made it necessary for Europeans to get together and move on Russia and to try to quarantine and destroy Russia since that time, even as they were killing and exercising, escalating oppression, exploitation against colonized people everywhere. And so Ho Chi Minh really represented that. He fought against this opportunism in France. It was mentioned during the overview here that Ho Chi Minh was a founding member of the French Communist Party. He tried to work with the Socialist Party, but the Socialist Party he felt was soft around the question of colonialism. So what kind of revolution you trying to make if you're not uniting with the colonial peoples of the world? Ho Chi Minh attended meetings by Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey was a critical anti-colonial force in the whole world. Some people try to narrow and understanding who Garvey was by saying he had the greatest Black movement, the Black movement in the world. He had the greatest anti-imperialist, the largest in the world, the most influential in the world. Even agents of the FBI would report, and you can read some of these reports that when people who were fighting around the world, they came and they reported to Garvey. Ho Chi Minh came to Garvey meetings, but so did others. And you got to remember that the Garvey movement was happening at the height of anti-colonial struggles that were happening in Mexico, that were happening in Nicaragua and other places around the world where people are fighting against colonialism. That's the way it happened. And so we have Garvey, Malcolm X's father and mother, and we cannot overlook his incredible mother, Louise Little. Was her name, and who was a secretary of the UNIA, who wrote for the newspaper, who was multilingual. I mean, we know about how Malcolm, enhanced his old education, like while in prison, etc. But Louise Little had laid the foundation for that with what she taught them until they stuck her. They used this whole welfare system against the family. They took her children from her, stuck them in foster homes. They stuck her in an insane asylum and whatever. This is typical. I just participated in a march, Black Mothers March, African Mothers March on the White House just last weekend, Mother's Day. And this Mother's Day march was based on the fact that they steal our children even today. They were doing it historically. That's how you and I got to be the different places that we are located in the world, because the colonizers stole our children, stole us, renamed us, gave us other identities and what have you.
That's what happened with Malcolm X's mother. His father was a representative, a leader of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, Marcus Garvey's organization. Garvey was influential, and he was everywhere in terms of the movement, including in Cuba, including so many other places. The Garvey movement was something that seeded the entire planet of anti-colonial notions and organizations. There were more organizations, Garvey branches, than there were organizations of the Communist International. That's just the truth. And that's because the power of the anti-colonial movement, and now we have come to understand that we were not simply looking at different policies, but a colonial mode of production. That's the thing that brought all of these forces together. That's the thing that brought the Bandung Conference together. That's the thing that brought the Tricontinental Conference together in 1966 in Cuba. That's the thing that had Che Guevara said he would leave Cuba and then go into Africa and try to initiate a continental-wide guerrilla war against colonialism. This is the thing that made them dangerous. It wasn't workers in some factory in Chicago or in Manchester in England. It was the colonial peoples of the world fighting to overturn this relationship. And that's the significance of Ho Chi Minh, who said, there's nothing more precious than freedom and independence. And that statement is what informed the consciousness and framed the consciousness of the people of Vietnam. And you saw them create the most magnificent, heroic acts and struggles against the French colonialism first, and then they went up against US colonialism. And they said this shows that a small country can defeat a large country. And they showed it with style, and they showed it with determination. They showed it with the philosophical understanding and acceptance of the mission that history had imposed on the colonized people to overturn this relationship we have with colonialism. So you had Ho Chi Minh, you had Marcus, you had Malcolm X, you had Marcus Garvey, both of them, Malcolm and Ho Chi Minh, influenced by the Garvey movement. You're struggling against colonialism, and all of them African internationalists in some way or another. We showed what Ho Chi Minh had to say about what was happening to African people, the most oppressed people on the planet Earth, he said. And he understood this because he was in Africa, he was in Harlem, he was with the Universal Negro Improvement Association African community. And then we have this incredible woman, Yuri Kochiyama, who was my dear friend and comrade, and who was a very significant force in the anti-colonial struggle in the United States, who worked with Malcolm X, who was with Malcolm X when he was murdered, who there are pictures of her holding Malcolm's head in her lap after he has been gunned down by our enemies, etc., who joined the African-American, the organization African-American Unity under the leadership of Malcolm X, who joined the Republic of New Africa, who was a member of the Revolutionary Action Movement under the leadership of people like comrade known as Max Stanford, and who was an extraordinary force and contributed to the development of the African People's Party and what have you. These were all African internationalists of some iteration of African internationalism, all of whom had the ability to struggle against colonialism, and Yuri did that. And she was incredible. Her parents had been locked in concentration camps in the United States. Here's the United States now in killing Russians and killing Ukrainians in the name of protecting the Ukrainians against the horrible Russians, the horrible, brutish, anti-democratic, autocratic Russians. Here the United States locked in 1940-something, locked all these Japanese in concentration camps. And she was in a concentration camp as a child. Her parents were in concentration camps. And her father died as a consequence of being in that concentration camp. I'm talking about Yuri. So you see her having a short life, her father. And you see Malcolm's mother and father having short lives and trauma, because that's what colonialism brings to you, brings to us. And you also, it's worth noting that Yuri Kochiyama was given the name Mary something when she was born. And Malcolm, of course, was Malcolm Little when he was born. And Ho Chi Minh had another name when he was born. But part of the whole struggle of redefining ourselves subsequent to colonialism is the fact that all of them became renamed as human beings too. That's part of the whole process of anti-colonial development that occurred everywhere. So I just want to say that I think this is really important kind of discussion and that we must remember Malcolm X, and we must remember Ho Chi Minh. We must remember Yuri Kochiyama, who was Japanese, but who connected to the anti-colonial struggle, who after participating in getting reparations for Japanese for them being locked in these concentration camps, dedicated much of her life toward the reparations for African people, who participated, by the way, in rallies and meetings that we had on a regular basis when she was there in Berkeley, California, where I think she may have passed, but who came to our rallies and participated in our meetings there, who I met in Mississippi many years ago. And by the way, by whom I was introduced to her by members of the revolution who had been the Revolutionary Action Movement, who had been African People's Party. And this says something about the relationship that she had with the struggle against colonialism and in solidarity with the struggle of African people to win our freedom and our independence. I'm an African internationalist. The African People's Socialist Party is an African internationalist organization. The crisis of imperialism is deep and profound right now, perhaps more than it has been in my lifetime and in your lifetime. And the fact is that it's not good enough for us simply to have discussions and memorializing people who played historic roles and important roles in our struggle, that we have to assume responsibility to taking our freedom. There's not going to be any freedom under US imperialism, under the colonial mode of production. Even as the US is again redefining itself and redefining its world as the great emancipator of the planet, as redefining itself as the center of the democratic universe and defining other countries who are fighting against this colonial domination as autocrats and things like that. We have to build our organization capacity. The African People's Socialist Party is on a mission. Our mission is to govern, become self-governed. We are located in various places around the world. We are working with oppressed and colonized people all around the world. Somebody said they couldn't unite with our position around the Russia-Ukraine question, despite the fact that every colonial power in the world continues to fight against Russia, just as they did in 1918, shortly after the Russian Revolution. They said because in the communities they live in, the Russians own stores and they treat people badly, and that they see Russian gangsters in the United States and et cetera, nothing positive about them. And they say things like the Russia of today is not the Soviet Union of yesterday, et cetera. That ain't got nothing to do with it. The Soviet Union was never exactly what I thought it should have been. I criticized the Soviet Union when it existed. I criticized what I thought was its opportunism. I criticized what I thought was its ability to sacrifice the interests of colonized and oppressed peoples around the world who were supposed to be, a part of even of the international communist movement for Russian foreign policy interests and objectives, for Soviet foreign policy interests and objectives. But there was never any doubt in my mind that the US, that the Western imperial powers, that the colonizers were the enemy, was the primary enemy. And so it's just like inside our party, we engage in criticism and self-criticism. If you do something wrong, even if we are all on the same trajectory toward freedom, I will criticize you and you should criticize me. And the same thing is true with how we have always dealt with the question of Russia, even when it was Soviet Russia. But having said that, we understand that the world is bigger than the particular location that we are stationed in, that there's a political and economic configuration of the world that has history, that came into existence a certain way, and it came into existence through colonial slavery. And it's this relationship, this mode of production that must be overturned. And that Russia offers at this moment in history, just as it has for more than 100 years, Russia offers a stumbling block. It is a bone in the throat. And this today is Russia. It's also China that's not being spoken of so much because they're trying to pick their battles and just be able to fight Russia and destroy Russia using all the resources that they can to destroy, cripple Russia, and then leave that and then attack China in a much more vehement and concentrated fashion. But the fact is they're trying to protect the same social system. So we support Russia in this question. Yes, we are on the side of Russia. It ain't because we're some kind of Russophiles etc., is because we recognize that our interest lies in destroying the colonial mode of production, and that Russia offers a contradiction for the colonizers and the colonial mode of production. So we surround China. I don't like what China is doing in Africa. I think that we have a huge struggle that we have to make. And how do we deal with how China is acting in Africa? We don't organize demonstrations against Chinese restaurants like I've seen done by some so-called Black liberation organization in the United States. We build the African People's Socialist Party. We win more people into our organization, into our ideological and political influence so they can understand the world from an African internationalist perspective and recognize that we have to destroy the colonial mode of production. And the only way that can be done is through revolutionary organization and committed men and women who are engaged in the struggle to destroy the system, uniting with every force that we can unite with around the planet that has the same objective interest, even if they don't understand it themselves, but they have the same objective interest in making that happen. Uhuru, remember Malcolm, remember Ho Chi Minh, remember Yuri Kochiyama, and all of the other forces of the world fighting against the colonial mode of production. Uhuru, build the African People's Socialist Party.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you just so much for just deepening our understanding around the significance of these comrades. I want to say also to be like these comrades and take up the struggle, as you have done, as the African People's Socialist Party has done over the last 50 years. I really want to appreciate just several things you mentioned. One, the whole question of the colonial mode of production, just really want to salute the development of the theory of African internationalism, bringing us to this conclusion that, the fundamental problem in the world, the thing that has locked the whole world into this contradiction, the colonial mode of production. And as I've heard you state before, by defining it in this way, it gives you something concrete to struggle against. And as it's defined in this way, there's no way to get around it. Like, no matter how you try to explain the situation, nothing is going to make sense if you're not dealing with this question of colonialism as the mode of production, as the global mode of production, not just something happening in this place in the US, a global mode of production, colonialism. And, I appreciate how you use this to contextualize the situation, just continuing deepening the situation between Russia and Ukraine, and how, you can see the absurdity of an argument that's been made about Russia and Russians in the community. You would ask the same question about Palestinians. Do we not support Palestine and the struggle to free Palestine? Because you got some, petty merchants in the community. Like, this is, we're dealing with this, it's anyway, I'm just like, that's, bringing up these things, it just kind of, you negate these things by dealing with these other issues in the world. And then the whole thing around China, and just saying that right now in the colonial mode of production and it being challenged by the anti-colonial struggles of the world, Africa is up for grabs because we do not have control over our own Africa. And that's what we've been saying this whole time, to build the African revolution, to seize, recapture control of our Africa and our resources. So I just really want to appreciate your leadership and this whole discussion. And we are going to be taking questions and answers. And so if you have any, please type them into the chat section. Also just want to salute, and we'll bring Comrade Matsemela back on in just a couple of minutes when we go into Q&A. But I want to take a moment right here to pause because this conversation is heating up. And I want to make sure that this discussion is being shared widely. So I need you to share this live right now. If you're just coming on, if you've been on with us since the start, go ahead and take this moment right now to share to all kinds of groups. Like this video, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. I'm calling on you, our live viewers, to like this video, tag a friend, share this video. The African People's Socialist Party is the only place where you can get this type of analysis. And if you think that it's important to you, then you have to do your part in getting it out there. So I'm going to ask you, how many times did you share this video? Comment in the chat section. Let me know how many times you shared, #shared when you shared it, but make sure you put it in the comment section. And again, share this video. Take this time right now to carry out that task. I'm calling on all of you. This is your assignment today, to share this video far and wide. So just want to again take this moment to allow you guys to do that, drive these shares up. And also encourage you guys to invite as many people to next week's study or any study in the future. Make sure to organize contingents to watch the study with you, organize viewing parties in your home, in your community. And like I said, tag a friend in the chat section, but bring people to these studies each week, bring them into this discussion, allow for people that you know to be impacted by the theory of African internationalism and the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela. So again, I just want to really, again, salute this discussion up to now. I want to thank everybody who is sharing. And again, Comrade Diane in Gainesville, all right, right on, shared to 70 groups. We have Comrade Kenda, who said hashtag shared. So Uhuru, Comrade Matum in Philly says shared. So Uhuru comrades, Comrade Lisa in Minneapolis, Minnesota says shared. Thank you, comrades. So drive it up. Okay, Sai, we have Sai on Facebook says hashtag share. So thank you all so much. Be like these comrades and drive these shares up. So right now, before we get into this Q&A, keep typing those questions into the chat. We're going to actually take a look at a couple of announcements, and we'll start with a video encouraging you and anybody you know to join the public relations team for Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru. Uhuru. So really want to just encourage you again, if you have these skills that the video laid out and you are interested in working and putting the chairman out into the world, to join, volunteer for this public relations team, email volunteer@omaliyeshitela.org. And let's check out some of those other announcements going on in our movement. Couple slides back. There we go. All right. So Uhuru Furniture in Philadelphia was nominated for Best Home Furnishing Store on the PHL 17, which is a Philly TV station, Top Spots viewers poll. The store has won it for the last 2 years. Uhuru Furniture, an African economic self-determination institution of the African People's Education and Defense Fund, deserves to win it again. So vote for Uhuru Furniture. Everyone can vote. Once a day, every day through tomorrow. So the last day is May 16th. Go to tinyurl.com/PHL17 Uhuru Furniture and vote, vote, vote. Tell everybody you know to vote for Uhuru Furniture in Philadelphia for Best Home Furnishing Store. Uhuru. Mark your calendars for African Liberation Day 2022, taking place May 28th and 29th, and featuring festivals and conferences in cities across the world. This year's African Liberation Day events will recognize the founding of the African People's Socialist Party in 1972 with the theme Relentless, 50 Years of Leadership Toward African Redemption. So to learn more about your region's ALD activities, visit alduhuru.org. And make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study, and support the Omali Taught Me show by donating now at paypal.me/Omali Taught Me. So that would conclude today's announcements. Just one more, and that's calling on you. We're talking about, if for any upcoming events, thank you. Any upcoming events that were not mentioned, you can check out the burningspear.com/events page to see everything that the African People's Socialist Party, the Uhuru movement, has going on. And now to my last announcement. Again, we're talking about organizing to destroy the colonial mode of production. And in order to destroy the colonial mode of production, you have to have a revolutionary party of the African working class. And you don't have to look any further to find that vehicle that's going to make this African revolution. It exists in the African People's Socialist Party. So I'm calling on you everywhere you're located. And we have people in Marion County, Georgia, Brooklyn, New York, Lakeland, Florida, Houston, Texas, Wichita, Kansas, Greenville, South Carolina, Oakland, California, St. Petersburg, Florida, St. Louis, Missouri, San Diego, California, Chicago, Illinois, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Portland, Oregon, Boston, Massachusetts, Huntsville, Alabama, Miami, Florida, Gainesville, Florida, occupied Azania or South Africa, Peekskill, New York, Grenada, Jamaica, Bermuda, Moorhead, Minnesota, Atlanta, Georgia checked in with us today. All of you Africans, wherever you are located, you need to join the African People's Socialist Party and organize for the African Revolution to overthrow the colonial mode of production. When we talk about recapturing our Africa and seizing the ability to produce and reproduce life for ourselves in our own interests, that's not going to happen through a matter of well-wishing. It's going to take revolutionary struggle. It's going to take courageous struggle like we've seen in Haiti, like we've seen in Vietnam. It's going to take us to, rise to the occasion as the leaders we've discussed today, Comrade Malcolm X, Ho Chi Minh. So join the African People's Socialist Party. Visit APSP.Uhuru.org to join the African People's Socialist Party. Join the African Revolution today. Don't wait a day later. So that's going to conclude our announcements. We're going to go ahead now and jump into the Q&A. I'm going to bring back our panelists. We have Chairman Omali Yeshitela, the leader of the African Nation, and we have the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement Vice President Matsemela Odom, and he's also the Cadre Development Director for the African People's Socialist Party in the Department of Agitation and Propaganda. So Uhuru, comrades, welcome and welcome back. And we're going to go ahead and take some questions. And so this first one came from Comrade Anthony in Jamaica. He asks, doesn't pose it to anyone specifically. So if you guys, if both of you want to contribute to any of the answers, please feel free. His question is there something inherent in how Europeans act with the rest of the world? Is there something inherent?
I'm not quite sure what is meant by inherent, but it's connected to what we talked about in terms of the colonial mode of production. The fact is that every society, the driving force in every society is the production and reproduction of real life. And what had happened at a time in Europe, this entity that we now know as Europe, it came into existence through the process of trying to resolve profound contradictions. And the contradiction was centered in how to live, and especially following the 1347 attack on this body in this landmass by the plague that was characterized as the Black Plague. And from just 4 short years, half the people in Europe died of the plague. The economy was devastated. And the thing that brought respite to that stemmed from a memory of the 1328 move of 3,000-mile trek by Mansa Musa from Mali on the way to Mecca with some entourage of 60,000 people, where gold was being dispensed all around the place, building mosques, et cetera, that it even affects for a generation the value of gold. So this memory of this African, this man from Africa, with all this gold, is something that influenced and inspired Europeans leaders to what people who are now part of Europe. The guy Portugal, so-called the navigator, they're looking for this gold. This is the great inspiration, and so they set out, through colonialism, through enslaving Africa, etc. So the point I want to make is, when you look at a mode of production, you're talking about how a society acquires what it needs to produce life, reproduce life. And a new society was born through the colonial process that created what we now know as Europe, that hooked up the entire world into a single world economy. That's the new society that's being born. And it was a society that was defined by the parasitic relationship that this body that's now known as Europe, that defines itself as Europe, has attached to the rest of the world in Africa. So you have a situation, if you want to say it's inherent, for the existing social system to continue
then it has to suck the blood. It's not even a choice. I mean, that's what some people make the mistake of thinking that, okay, stop war and then spend some money on education, or stop war and spend some money. It doesn't have a choice. The system cannot survive. A parasite cannot survive without sucking the blood, eating from the host. And Europe has attached itself to this host. And a parasitic relationship is defined in that fashion, and the colonial mode of production is defined in that fashion. So if there's something inherent, it's inherent in the colonial mode of production, yes. And the thing is that the parasite will not easily volunteer to stop being a parasite because it'll die. But there is an option here, and that Europeans, like in Ukraine, people say, "Oh, the poor Ukrainians, what can they do?" Well, turn your guns on your leaders and unite with the colonized peoples of the world to take back our resources, etc. Become one with the people who are the host, and we'll destroy this parasite that you're no longer attached to. So that's the way forward. Join the African People's Solidarity Committee. Join the Uhuru Solidarity Movement for those who exist within the colonizers who want to detach themselves from this trajectory. Uhuru. I know it was a long response, but I hope it was helpful anyway. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. Matsemela, did you have anything before we move on to the next question?
No, just to underscore what Chairman said and note that the self-preservation, it's the colonial mode of production. He speaks of Europe, but Europe itself is a national identity created and drawn from the colonial mode of production, the domination of African and other colonized people. Is the only way in which it could exist. And to underscore that this is a material contradiction, I know that there's a sort of like philosophical idealism inherent in the way in which that question, some people approach that question and things like that. But also to note that Chairman Omali Yeshitela in 1976, with the formation of the African People's Solidarity Committee, has laid the path towards how to overturn that contradiction, how all people, colonized and colonizers, can work to overturn that contradiction. And Europeans, colonizers, or whatever could, re-enter the fold of humanity by struggling to do that.
Yes.
Well, let me say, in relationship to that, Comrade Acoli, in the United States, there used to be this thing about how, there's the Black liberation movement, and then there's the struggle for socialism or something over there. And the struggle for socialism is sort of led by white people. And what we're saying is the struggle for socialism is led by us. That's in the United States, that's globally. That the struggle for socialism is a struggle to destroy the colonial mode of production. It's led by Yuri and Ho Chi Minh and all these incredible forces who are fighting to overturn the colonial mode of production. It ain't gonna be no white thing. In fact, there's a whole deconstruction of this happening everywhere. That's why you have people marching down the streets chanting, "You will not replace us." The so-called replacement theory that they claim is responsible for this murder that happened Saturday. An 18-year-old white Ukrainian, white guy who goes into a Buffalo shop and shoot 13 people, killing 10 of them with the objective of murdering African people. This whole notion that, and it is not an absolute untruth. That the fact is that the presence and existence of the colonial mode of production is under attack, under assault by the rest of us. And what people are doing, whatever their intention is, fighting to protect and maintain the colonial mode of production, which is white domination of the world at this time in history. And yes, you will be replaced. Yes, you will. We're going to replace you. And, this kind of murder is not going to stop it. Uhuru.
For real, Chairman, thank you. And yeah, it just speaks to the existential crisis of, this whole social system and like you said, the whole identity of, this consolidated identity born from the colonial mode of production. So thank you, both Chairman and Comrade Matsemela, for answering Comrade Anthony's question. Anthony is located in Jamaica. I also just wanted to read this comment coming from Comrade Imco. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Imco says the Pan-Indigenous group of ISR is watching as a group on Sunday mornings. So Uhuru, Comrade, thank you so much for organizing a group to participate in these studies.
Who was that? Who was that from?
Imco, MKO, Imco.
And what does it say?
It says the Pan-Indigenous group of the ISR is watching as a group on Sunday mornings.
Uhuru.
Uhuru. Comrade Mandisi asked a question. Uhuru, question for Vice President Matsemela and/or the chairman. At the end of Vice President's presentation, there was an emphasis to Malcolm's call to build the path. How do each of you view the path being built?
I'm not sure. I think you may be referencing the thing that I put forth some time ago in terms of like in Vietnam, where the attempt to murder, to destroy the struggle of freedom for the people in Vietnam was unsuccessful in part because there was a free, at least liberated North Vietnam. And as long as there was a North Vietnam, that the Vietnamese could keep resources going into South Vietnam, where the struggle was centered at that moment. And they characterized this method of moving resources from north to south as the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I think that may have been what was talking about, unless Comrade Matsemela knows about something that's about a path. I didn't. But this is and so what we were saying is that African internationalism gives us the ability for our movement to never be killed, because they can kill a Malcolm X in the United States or Lumumba in Congo and destroy those particular organizations, but the movement will still live because wherever we are, we can begin to create, to reinforce those struggles wherever we are, with the Malcolm X trail, or Patrice Lumumba trail, or Marcus Garvey trail, et cetera. We can be moving around the globe, reinforcing ideologically, reinforcing materially, whatever it is that it takes to win and to prevent our movement from being destroyed by the effectiveness of our imperial enemies in one particular place. So I don't know if that's what this comment was referencing, but that's what was meant by the statement that I made some time ago. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Comrade Mandisi. And just let us know in the comment section if this is helpful to answer your question. Our next question, unless Comrade Matsemela, did you want to speak to that? I don't want to.
Well, yeah, just briefly, Chairman talked about it, but I also think that Chairman also mentioned earlier that the road to socialism is painted black. So when we talk about the path towards freedom, we understand that, but it's through the party. It's through the party that has not liquidated or abandoned the international consciousness, the international collectivity of African people, African international struggle, the same struggle that Garvey waged 100 years ago, is our struggle. So when you hear, there's so many different iterations, some of them supposedly revolutionary, many of them backwards and neo-colonial, that will, just have African people here in the U.S. as a part of some U.S.-based struggle, whether it be revolutionary struggle for some land in the U.S. or just integration into a burning house. But all of that liquidates it. I mean, Vietnam could not have been liberated by just being North Vietnam. I mean, we see what happens in North Korea and other places in which they've got, the communists have some liberated territory, but the colonial powers used the south of it to smother the life of the people in the North and stuff like that. So it was sort of, so I really take the chairman saying, hey, we need that path. We build our liberated territories, build our African workers' councils wherever we're at, but we use that to fight for an international African revolution.
Uhuru, thank you, Comrade Vice President Matsemela. And again, thank you, Mandisi, for your question. Comrade Jamal in Moorhead, Minnesota makes a comment. It's odd for folks to judge a whole people who've engaged in revolution and expel the colonizer based on its bootlicking, neocolonialist and or petite bourgeoisie exiles. Do folks say, well, I don't like Cubans because of some Gusano nonsense? I don't get it. This was in regards to the discussion we were having around Russia and Ukraine. Comrade Tafari, the director of organization in the Africa region and located in occupied Azania, asked this question. I heard that Comrade Ho Chi Minh started off as an anti-colonial nationalist and only became a communist later. Is there any significance in that?
Uhuru, yeah, I think that's profoundly significant. I think that that it's really natural for people to struggle to reclaim their dignity and the resources they see colonizers. In Vietnam, of course, you had the French lording it over the people in Vietnam. They had turned much of Vietnam into a drug colony. The people were insulted on a regular basis. People would go to, we recognize what happens to African people with the skin lighteners and all this, and nationalists really find that repugnant. But in Vietnam, it was possible to go to a barbershop and get your eye snipped so that they would look more like white people's eyes, things like this. This is kind of, humiliation that people live with, and just the ongoing theft of our resources, the rape of the women, and the ability for them to just even declare that whether you're sane or not, and if in anything that goes against the existing order is crazy. I think about what happened to Louise Little, who was declared crazy. But anything, and when I was in the U.S. military, and had come to a conclusion that it would be better for me to take my weapon and go into downtown, wherever I was stationed in Georgia, and shoot all the white people. They sent me to a psychiatrist, because they decide what's crazy. And of course, the most logical thing in the world that a slave could do is kill a slave master. That's the height of sanity. But the slave master decides what is sane and what is not. Our whole existence is determined by this relationship that we have with colonialism. So, I just think it's really important, for us to understand that there's no way forward except that. And the other thing related to that is that we built a certain kind of party, and we're still constructing it. We're still engaged in struggles to make it what it needs to be, what it has to be, to win more and more African people into a long-term relationship to the defeat of this social system, to win more and more peoples around the world to recognize that African people in the United States, by and large, are not fighting to make white people like us. How are you going to go to the international community and ask them to help you fight to make white people like you, which is the same thing the struggle against racism is about? No, we want total liberation. We have to be a self-governing people. We build a political party based on that. Whether somebody is serious about overturning this relationship by what they do, and not just, and by which I mean whether or not we build an actual capacity to self-govern, to destroy our colonial overlords, to destroy that whole system that locks us into. Do you have that kind of organization? Are you creating that kind of cadre? Do you provide that kind of political education for the members of the organization and for the masses of African people who can therefore have an understanding to what end we are struggling? These are really critical questions. Everybody's a revolutionary if you just listen to what their declaration, but what do they do?
what have they created? Revolution is about taking power. Revolution, as Malcolm says, is about land. It's about having your own forces to make that happen, not some empty desire for it, but to actually put in place the instrument through which you can win your freedom. And that's a telling, kind of thing. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Thank you, Chairman. And that, again, is coming from Comrade Director Tafari in Occupied Azania, who posed that question. Comrade Sayero in Battle Creek, Michigan, asked this question. And I also want to, if we can, try to tie this in. You recently did, Chairman, a webinar on this past Wednesday around the this whole Roe versus Wade leak from the Supreme Court, and we were able to deepen, how the colonial mode of production is the primary contradiction. As Chairman Omali, would you not state that what we all saw on yesterday with the 18-year-old, he characterized himself as a white supremacist killer, is nothing new and yet a step towards this kind of escalation by the colonizer? So, Uhuru, that was Comrade Sayero's question.
I mean, both of that's, yeah, it's true. I mean, you have the situation where the growing number of especially conscious, and the potential for this consciousness is always there, about the colonized. I mean, you got to remember this, for whatever benefit people think they are achieving with the right for an abortion, that it was promoted initially by eugenicists, somebody who wanted to get rid of Black people. And so you have two things happening. You've got this process of white people coming into public places, whether it's a church or in this instance, a supermarket, and killing up a whole a lot of African people, which you can call, I guess you can have a post-birth abortion. Or you have Supreme Courts fighting to preserve, preserve the numbers of white people who are there. This is an interesting kind of contradiction that the colonized is faced with. So yeah, I see a relationship, between, and it is historic. It's always happened, the killing masses of Black people. This is, in fact, this is lightweight compared to what we have seen happen to us, generally speaking. And what makes it lightweight in part is because the state, on the one hand, the colonial state is not necessarily interested in seeing this kind of killing happen, not necessarily. Not because they like Black people, but because it gets you upset. It makes people upset. And on the one hand, on the other hand, you have the mayor in Buffalo who comes out and says that something to the effect that this guy came from out of town, that he was not one of the nice white people from Buffalo. He came from out of town. And I don't know what out of town was. I don't know if that was in Bristol or Manchester or Antwerp or whatever we mean, out of town. But did those people come from out of town, from all those places, and kidnap Africans and do all the horrible things and bring us here in the first place? The history of them killing us goes back much further than what just happened in Buffalo. And you can't explain that away by saying the guy came from out of town, otherwise everything is nice. How the hell you get to Buffalo in the first place? Somebody came from out of town to get us and brought us there. The fact is, that's the colonial mode of production. They want to lock us into this narrow perception of the world that Buffalo is all right, except for the white people who come from out of town. I happen to know that they kill Buffalo, the police, on a regular basis in Buffalo, just like they do every place else. And the white people who kill us in Buffalo, come from various places in the world, white world, et cetera. And, so yeah, this is as typical, as historical what they do. And the Roe versus Wade thing, I think you're going to see this, it has implications for us, what the Supreme Court does, because they've closed various avenues for us to live a quality life. We have to break through that with organization, philosophy, and what have you. We have to create things like the the African People's Child Care Collectives,
so that we can reconstruct the kind of social relationships we had before we were brought into this colonial mode of production, where a decision about having a baby is not determined by whether a single mother or a single family can take care of it, where the decision to have a baby is not based on, is not circumscribed by the imposed colonial poverty that we face every place we live as Black people, where there is, where this horrible human being, Hillary Clinton, who stole that saying from Black people that it takes a village to raise a child, stole it from the history of our relationship as African people, where we had a different mode of production. And that's what we have to fight to reclaim. Fighting, there are several ways you can engage in struggle. And one is perpetually fighting to try to simply fighting to survive within the colonial mode of production, simply fighting to have a good life as a slave, or even if you fight to have a good life as a slave, or a better life as a slave, the objective is to destroy slavery, destroy colonialism, kill the slave master, kill the colonizer. I mean, this is what has to happen if we really want to be free. So you have a movement of white women, effectively, a contradiction between white people. Sometimes this contradiction is characterized as fascism. Sometimes it's characterized as patriarchy. It has all kinds of iterations in terms of its characterization. But this is a contradiction between white people and between the colonizers. And the colonizers will recruit as many of us as possible onto one side or the other in order to carry out its own mission. There are what they call conservative reactionary sectors of the colonizers who will hold up African people and say, look, more Africans are dying through abortion, babies are dying through abortion. Therefore, you should join us in opposition to abortions and supporting the Supreme Court ruling. Then there's the other sector who's saying that more Africans use abortions, and it's really important to you. You should join us to fight for safe abortions. But the fact is, we live under colonial domination. And colonialism has determined when we can have a baby, whether we can have a baby, have a family even. This is an assault. This is the major assault. And you can stay on this treadmill trying to make white power act right, make colonialism be good forever. But the objective has to be African internationalism, to destroy the colonial mode of production, come into the African People's Socialist Party and destroy this monster so that we don't have these kinds of choices imposed on us, these violent choices imposed on us. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you so much. And thank you, Comrade Sayero, for raising that question. That's allowing us to kind of open up a lot of things. It just really want to appreciate that. And I think, just understanding the colonial mode of production, again, is helping to properly contextualize everything, and it's keeping us on track, regardless of, where it is that, the colonizer, the opportunists, try to take it, we are able to stay focused on the fundamental problem. And, I just think that the colonial mode of production helps to even show not just the absurdity, but even the whole, it's so insulting. I mean, especially on the pro-abortion, and to be like, well, African women rely on abortions more, so support, it's just, what? I'm just trying to even wrap my brain around this. And I wanted to say too, that, in the US, all white people are from out of town. They ain't from here. So, but this is like the fabric, right, of, a whole system coming into existence through the colonial mode of production. And, lynching was a national pastime here. So all of the most, atrocious, grotesque acts you can think of that could be committed against a person has been committed against African people throughout the world and in the US. So I just appreciate, Chairman, you connecting that. Comrade Matsemela, I don't know if you have anything to contribute to this part of the discussion before moving forward. Okay. All right. So this next question is coming from Comrade King on YouTube. Says, Chairman, can you speak to can you speak to the absurdity of some quote unquote African Americans that dub themselves freedmen and quote unquote foundational American citizens, claiming they are the original citizens and using phrases such as "you will not replace us," referring to so-called immigrants from the Caribbean, Africa, Mexico, etc., that take the jobs of quote unquote Americans?
Well, first of all, the whole nation of citizenship is a legal definition. And who makes the law? The colonial state makes the law. It legalizes itself. So the runaround saying I'm really original citizens presupposes that you have some kind of state power, some kind of to confer citizenship upon yourself or somebody else. You ain't got that, buddy. The fact is African people suffer from not having state power because the colonizer has it all, one. And having state power, the colonizer defines what is a citizen. And the colonizer defines you as a citizen. They shoot you down on a regular basis, starve your family on a regular basis, and tell you that another African, should that African be accessible to you, is illegal, is not a citizen. So you unite with the oppressor against who an African that should be your ally, should be with you in the trenches. Which has an automatic material interest in fighting with you. You're a dummy. That person is working on the side of the oppressor to maintain colonialism. It's another iteration of new Africanism and all this other kind of stuff that would separate African people from each other with some false, some fanciful notion that our relationship with empire has redefined us as a people. So it is accepting the notion that the colonizer has created a reality within which we have to function and live, as opposed to destroying this. Listen, what should really be understood is that what happens to African people in the United States has its origin to what happened to African people in Africa. And that you talk about how bad off we may be at any given time, Africa is worse off because of the consequence that they got us. There's no way you can solve a problem for African people by getting a good job in the United States. Somebody took your job, you ain't had a job. They took your job with the Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln took your job. And then gave it back to you with the 13th Amendment when they stuck us in prison and said, want a job, go to jail. So this whole notion that somehow somebody took your job, you don't even have an economy that you can create a job with, generally speaking. That's what we're working for. That's the kind of work that we do as a party. We create jobs and enterprise, et cetera, to negate the colonizer, not be a part of it, not to join in, but to negate them. That's what Black Power Blueprint is about in Oakland. That's what the work that we're trying to do every place in the world, to create our own anti-colonial entity. That's why we create what we call dual and contending power as a part of the process to overturn this relationship. So, that's just a really, bad notion. And I think that I really believe that there are specialists, intelligence, colonial intelligence specialists that sit up and dream up these kinds of schemes and throw it into our communities, playing on the low level of political understanding that might exist for us, and this whole thing about somehow adults, American descendants of slaves, and so where we get the reparations, just Black people with good birth certificates can get the money, and not the Africans who may have come from someplace else. The political economy of this country was built as a consequence of what happened to African and indigenous people. They didn't just say, let's take out the money and resources that we got from the continent of Africa and separate that out. No, they took it all. And the most invaluable resource that was stolen from Africa is African people ourselves. So this whole notion that's put into our community, so you fighting over reparations that you ain't never got and that you never will get because you were fighting with other Africans as opposed to the colonizer, the white man that put you in this situation. I don't want to be insulting. I think I do. That's just stupid. That's just ridiculous. And we can't tolerate that. We can't tolerate that. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. And I You know, when I hear stuff like that, I think of how insidious, you know, Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois and Du Boisism, you know, has been, because I feel like these are just iterations of the things that he put forward to attack the Garvey movement. You know, anyway, yeah. Uhuru.
So the white man that came from France, does he get to keep anything? The white man can trace his ancestry to England. What does he get to keep? And the white man that traces his ancestry to Germany, does he get to keep anything? Or we just separating everybody out, just black people? Now, that's ridiculous. That's you know, I'm sorry, Comrade Matsemela, you were about to say something.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, talking about Du Bois, because how in Du Bois, in 1915, Du Bois talked about, you know, the first imperialist world war as the cause of the assault on Africa. But then 2 years later, he said that he wrote this thing called, what was it called? Closed Ranks, and said that Africa's the U.S. is our country and we have to fight for it. But that was his own opportunistic objectives he was struggling towards. His and the NAACP. So I see the same petty bourgeois contradictions, and I don't think that it's a reach, Chairman, to suggest that this stuff is some form of counterinsurgency placed upon us. I mean, you know, there was you know, many of the people pushing this stuff were part of some, you know, documentaries that just popped up out of nowhere a decade ago or so, pushing this sort of stuff, the foundational Black Americans and all this other stuff. And yeah, it's just pure opportunism. And sometimes, and I've heard Chairman say, you know, that these people use the red, black, and green to fight the red, black, and green. So sometimes it'll be red, black, and green. Sometimes they'll have a dashiki on and all this other stuff. But it's anti-African and it's for sure counterinsurgent. So yeah.
And it's anti-Malcolm.
Indeed.
It's anti-Malcolm. You can't have Malcolm X in that politic too.
Right.
You can't have Garvey in that politic too. That's why many of the Pan-Africanists are trying to obscure who Garvey was by making him a Pan-Africanist. That's why even today you hear them putting Malcolm X forward as some kind of civil rights leader or civil rights activist, the man that they killed, murdered precisely because he was not a civil rights activist, etc. So you can't have Malcolm X in that kind of politic and Garvey in that kind of politic, and you need to come out and say that you're against Malcolm X. You don't believe in Garvey and Malcolm X. You don't believe in Ho Chi Minh, the Vietnamese Revolution. Say it, because you can't have it all. You can't have that in revolution at the same time.
Uhuru, absolutely, Chairman. Thank you, Comrade Matsemela. We are winding down time here, so we won't be able to take every question that we're getting in, but I do want to read this comment that came from Comrade Imco, who organized this viewing party. Said, the 900 plus indigenous nations of Turtle Island are the hashtag rightful stewards. There's no such thing as a US citizen, but an illegitimate colonial state. So Uhuru, Comrade Imco.
Yeah. And that's obscured often. That's why they've come up with the concept of how do they call it, the first Americans, like somehow, you know, and they obscure this relationship by making indigenous people the first Americans. We just dug up a tomb or grave of 2,000 Americans who were here 2,000 years ago. There's no American 2,000 years ago. It was even, you wouldn't hard to find a white person 2,000 years ago. You know, so this is just absolute nonsense, and this is obscurity. And that's why the colonial mode of production is absolutely necessary for us to understand. I'm sorry, go ahead, Comrade Director.
True. Well, there's just nothing obscure about the colonial mode of production.
Oh.
Nope. So I'm gonna take this last question just because I think it's a really important one. All the questions are important, but I just want to raise this one in particular. Comrade Robert on YouTube asked, Uhuru, what lessons are there for us in the release of Sundiata Acoli? It's my thought that it informs us we are forever engaged in a protracted struggle for self-determination and liberation globally.
Thank you for that mention of Comrade Sundiata Acoli. And some people have not understood that, Comrade Robert, because our movement was severely wounded. There was a military defeat of the Black Revolution in the 1960s. Sundiata was a part of that revolutionary movement. I was. And there are other people, and many of them went to prison if they were not assassinated. Malcolm was killed, King was killed. More than 30 members of the Black Panther Party killed in 1968 alone. This is what happened to us. And for a while, there was great movement to free these political prisoners. The movement was transferred inside the prison. That's why you saw in Attica, the 40 some odd people killed by Rockefeller, the great liberal white man colonizer who was governor there, in places like Rayford, in St. Petersburg, other prisons. You saw all of this stuff happen, people murdered, the movement crushed, outside and inside, people pushed underground. So there was nobody out here to fight for the political prisoners in a meaningful way. I mean, we did work as the party. I mean, I visited Sundiata early on and used to plot, how the hell can we break him out of there? And that what I used to love so much about the Black Liberation Army initially was because they didn't believe in staying in those jails. They put them in prison, they was damn sure going to try to break out. That was what you're supposed to do. And but Sundiata and others, got caught up at the time our movement was killed on the one hand, and then the struggle against colonialism, the notion that we're fighting against colonialism was obscured, and then instead we're fighting against racism. And then our problems being solved, not through freeing these freedom fighters, but our problem being solved by the election of a traitor, a sellout, opportunists like Barack Hussein Obama, and a whole bunch of other sellouts who were thrust into the forefront using the electoral process as a primary means by which we struggle. So Sundiata, I think it's really important for us to uphold Sundiata. And the fact is that they finally released Sundiata is testimony to the fact that even at 85 years old, he was such a symbol of anti-colonial resistance that they refused to release him. They are murderers and killers. And so they held Sundiata this long. So, I mean, the lesson for us is the struggle for colonialism is ongoing. And as Comrade said, it's protracted. It's not over, it's protracted. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you so much. Thank you, Comrade Robert, for raising that question. And just really thank all of you for all the questions that you've posed to our panelists today, and thank our panelists, of course. So as I mentioned, we are nearing the end. So I want to just make sure we have the opportunity to hear some closing remarks from our panelists. So we'll start with you, Comrade Matsemela. I just want to also say, really appreciate this uncoordinated hat game today. We all came with it, but thank you. Uhuru. So Comrade Matsemela, would you please give us some closing remarks?
Yeah, Uhuru. Well, shoot, I mean, we are treading the legacy of Malcolm and Garvey and Chairman Omali Yeshitela, so we gotta come with the style politics, as show people what a liberated Africa gonna look like. I really just appreciate this. I appreciate upholding the struggle to free a Comrade Sundiata Acoli as really a closing remark as well, because of the fact, as Chairman Omali Yeshitela noted, that Sundiata had been a prisoner for so long under what we might call, like I said, a Sundiata clause, reminiscent of the Sobukwe clause that Robert Mangalisha Sobukwe had been held under, the understanding that you can just endlessly extend a person's sentence if you declare them a threat to society. But yes, they were a threat to society, colonial society, the colonial mode of production, and that Sundiata Acoli, Robert Mangalisha Sobukwe, and Chairman Omali Yeshitela have never abandoned the anti-colonial struggle of African people, never repudiated, no matter what has been dangled in front of them. That has always been their cause. And that's the true lesson of May 19th.
Uhuru. I want to thank you so much, Comrade Director, and also Comrade Vice President Matsemela. And I want to unite with you about the significance of the last question speaking to Sundiata Acoli. And I want to remind us also that
the opportunism of the white colonial left, the left colonizer, who we hear all the time talking about Chelsea Manning and talking about people like Julian Assange, both of whom locked up in prisons as a consequence of anti-democratic acts by the United States government, but not because of acts that they were involved in to try to overturn this relationship, this colonial relationship, or even the capitalist system itself. But we don't hear and did not hear this kind of urgency, this kind of unrequested, this kind of voluntary demand for the release of Sundiata, for the release of the Black Liberation Army forces, for the release of even people like Marilyn Buck, who was a white woman who stood side by side with the anti-colonial struggle of African people, for the release of Leonard Peltier. This is opportunism. Because when you look at Chelsea Manning and you look at people like Julian Assange, this is a contest, again, for democracy within the colonial system. When you look at Peltier, a colonized indigenous person, the struggle that he was involved in, the struggle he is involved in, the struggle of Black Liberation Army, the struggle of Sundiata, this is the struggle to overturn this colonial relationship. And that's the opportunism of the left colonizers, sometimes calling themselves communists, et cetera. I want to say that I want to unite with this understanding that was also put forth about the relentless, about the fact that this is a protracted struggle. And this is part of the significance of the African People's Socialist Party, not just that some old people like myself might still be around, but we have a party that has 50 years of history, relentlessly fighting to end this struggle, that didn't quit because something else was trending about what was more popular, because patriarchy is now on the line, getting a lot of likes and hits on social media, or some other thing like that. This 50-year history to overturn colonialism, this is the thing that deepened our understanding and took us to a recognition of the existence of the colonial mode of production. And I want to thank everybody for coming on to this, because that's what Malcolm X was about. Gives us an opportunity to sum up Comrade Malcolm X, beloved Malcolm X. Gives us an opportunity to talk about Ho Chi Minh, who was quite clear when he said there's nothing more precious than freedom and independence. And this is what everybody should be understanding. He didn't say there's nothing more precious than fighting against racism or making the French or the Americans like us. And then Comrade Yuri Kochiyama, this is what she stood for. She stood shoulder to shoulder with us. She was with Malcolm when they murdered him. She was with me in Oakland and Mississippi and places like that. So 50 years of relentless struggle for Africa redemption, that's what this party has been dealing with. And this is the trajectory that we've been on for the longest period of time. And we will not quit. The fact is that we will win, and we are winning. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, we are winning. Uhuru, so much. I want to salute you and Comrade Vice President Matsemela, and just appreciate, again, the profound leadership, this 50-year history, this deepening and understanding of these significant figures, again, not just as like this practice of nostalgia, but because the struggle continues, and we are going to see the struggle to a successful conclusion. So just really want to thank both of you and all of our comrades, viewers today. This has been yet another profound discussion. I want to thank our guests and salute the leadership of the chairman. Want to encourage you to follow the chairman on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. A reminder, if you're interested in volunteering for the public relations team, if you have social media, video editing skills, photography skills, all of the skills related to public relations, getting the chairman out into the world on virtually every venue possible, then you need to reach out to volunteer at omaliyeshitela.org to express your interest and working for the public relations team for Chairman Omali Yeshitela. So with that, I just want to close by saying, build the African Revolution, join the African People's Socialist Party, visit APSP, Uhuru.org, Vanguard up, and Uhuru.
Vanguard up, Israel too.
E Africa.
E Africa.
Is huele tú.
Huele tú.
Uhuru